Welcome to Steve and Friends, everybody. Got a great conversation chat lined up today. We've been talking to a number of our incredible Queensland Northern Territory campus pastors. As we say every time, we've gone from be able to go from 1 to 10 campuses in 10 years has been quite a journey, but only possible because of the leaders, the team, the campus pastors that we have. So you're going to get to know Andrew and Crystal a lot better through this conversation. And I've got to tell you, you need to stick around and hear the whole story, because there's stuff that I'm finding out about these two that I didn't know before either. Some fantastic stuff to talk about personal life, family, and about church and church transitions as well. So it's going to be really, really good. Now, I say there's a couple of my favorites. I probably say that every single time, but they genuinely are amazing people that we love to bits. So let's just start off, Andrew.
Yes.
Which hairstyle says more about you, the one you have today or the one that I am putting up on screen right now? And that is the one with you and I think Brother Hiron.
Yeah.
The long flowing locks, which is the best?
Well, look, the true answer is I can't do the long flowing locks anymore because my hairline's receding. So that's the reason I brush it forward, so you don't see the front bit where it's now missing. So my heart says the long flowing locks, but my head says I need to take a more modest route.
There's a lot of wisdom in that answer. Crystal, what do you prefer?
Definitely shorter. 100%.
All right, that's all right. So, Andrew, let's get straight into this because there's some fantastic stuff to talk about today. It'd be great if people got to know a little bit more the Andrew that they don't know. So tell us about the early years and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I'm in Queensland, born and bred my whole life. So I was born in the mighty Ipswich, and the only kind of detour that we've taken is I lived out at Roma, which is about 600 kilometres more towards the centre of Australia for about 2 or 3 years.
What about family? Tell me about your family.
Yeah. So my grandparents were born and bred, lived in Warwick their whole life on my mum's side. And on my dad's side, to be perfectly honest, it's actually really hard to trace it because Dad ended up in the foster care system for his formative years and never really reconnected with his family from there. So we kind of know where Dad kind of roughly grew up, but we don't have like the full family tree history available to us.
So was he kind of that, like one family, one foster parents, or many?
Yeah, so he went through one foster parents. His dad actually remarried, and when his mum passed away when he was young, and the relationship between his stepmom and him wasn't great. So he was then put into the old boys' town, which is kind of like a modern day orphanage, and he was fostered out to one family who raised him when he was kind of the same age as Ezekiel, about 12 or 13. Yeah.
Right. Was he Christian?
He was, yeah. So he grew up, that family was actually a Christian family, and they put him in church. And when he met my mum, they grew up in church together. He was really sold out actually for church, heavily involved in it. When he was kind of in his mid-20s and he had some kids under his belt, he actually really felt like a sense of call into to ministry to build the church. And I think because of his upbringing, that brought a bit of nervousness to him. My dad I probably understand my dad a lot more now as a father than I did maybe 15 years ago. So I have some of the similar traits of the need to feel like I'm, moving forward and like achieving and kicking goals is really important to me. And it was for him too. And I think when he grew up in such horrific circumstances, I think it triggered in him this desire, or I know it triggered in him this desire that his life would be significant and mean something. And I think that he identified that as like probably a sense of worldly success. So he really postured his life towards that. And then when he felt the call to ministry, I think maybe a common misconception is that you can't be successful in the world, in the eyes of the world, in ministry, because you have to give everything up. So that's actually when I mentioned we lived in Roma. That's actually when he moved the whole family to Roma to follow a job promotion instead of really getting involved in local church. And it was probably for his faith journey. He'd walked a faith journey up into that moment. That was really the beginning of the end in that kind of space.
There's that real, back then, I guess, poverty mentality on one side.
Yes.
The other side, a pastor can't be in business and kind of other jobs. And, to be in the ministry, to be a pastor, you actually, to suffer for Jesus, hey? So he went through all of that and kind of ended up the business route, did he?
Yeah, and it's interesting. When I actually got the church offer to come on staff, my personal career and my resume was starting to look like a lot better. I was moving into mid-management roles. And I remember approaching him, and like, I just want to be really kind. Like, I understand my dad now. When you've got a 25-year-old who's got 2 children, whose career is pointing in a certain direction, he'd offered us an opportunity to work with him that was it was pretty lucrative. And I said no to all of that to work on church staff. And I can remember the expression of what he thought was a mistake for me. I can also remember, like, a key part of the transformative journey was when he actually came to a Hillsong Christmas carols event, Christmas spectacular. And it's like he stood in the room and he realized kind of what we're a part of. And I think it was important for him as a father that his son would be successful. And I think he probably recognized that exactly what you talked about there, that mentality isn't necessarily always true. So him moving us out to Roma was actually like a really heartbreaking time for my mum, because the whole family moved to Roma, but dad stayed and mum moved back with the kids to come back to Ipswich. Yeah.
Now, your parents, did they stay together? What was the story there?
No, they didn't. No. So mum and dad, when I was in grade 5, got divorced. And so we kind of grew up with a single mum. Then dad wasn't really involved in our life kind of from that moment onwards. And it probably wasn't until I was a young man who was married where I really worked to reconcile that relationship. And he's a great granddad now to our children. And it's actually been remarkable to watch how he has grown and changed. And I, as a man now, as a father, I really understand some of his decisions. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I can understand all of that. And that went a long way, I think, to me having some hard opinions when I was a teenager about him, to now being able to extend some forgiveness and
and a good relationship now, which is a great story. Fantastic. Crystal, what about you? So your family background wasn't straightforward either, eh?
No. So my family weren't in church. I didn't grow up in church. I went to church a few times with my mum growing up. Her parents are Anglican, so they're devout. But my dad had a little bit of a similar trajectory as Andrew's, in that his mum died when he was 9, so of appendicitis, and his dad couldn't look after them, so they ended up being in a Catholic orphanage. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I don't even think anything bad happened, but just the circumstances around it. Dad's pretty anti-church now. But he then they moved around a lot. So that was actually in Melbourne, and they ended up here in Brisbane. And my dad's dad actually married my mum's sister. So, and then continued the family there a bit. So that's kind of his story. And my mum is one of 5 girls. She is the youngest, but when she was young, she fell off of a tyre swing and suffered a degree of brain damage. So she has a big scar there now. And so then growing up, my mum and dad were, I wouldn't say it was a healthy relationship, and they'd lost. So I'm actually one of 5. I'm the middle child, right in the middle, and my oldest brother passed away when he was 9 days old. So that put a lot of strain on the relationship, and eventually just, from lots of separations while I was in high school and then getting back together. They eventually divorced when I was in grade 12. So wow. A bit about my story.
So how was relationship with your dad?
Not great. I still don't have a strong relationship with my dad. When I was in high school, it was actually such that I didn't want to live with my dad anymore. It wasn't a great relationship. So I moved in and out of home a few times. So the first time I moved out of home was when I was 14, actually, in grade 9. So I moved in with a friend for about a year. And then that's when mum and dad really started, mum actually started moving out of the family home and getting places of her own. And so I would move in with her, and then she would move back with dad and I would move back out. And it went like that for a bit until she finally left him after grade 12 and I moved back in until I got married to Andrew.
Yeah, wow. So you can see how you two value family and do so great with with the
Absolutely.
kids, Zeke and Sabella. So that's a really challenging upbringing. Wow. So Dad's mum dying when he was 9, foster home, loss of a 5-day-old, little son, terrible accident for your mum, divorce, man, it's all in there. So you became a Christian, I think you said about 19, would that be 18, 19? How did that happen?
19. Yeah, 19. So in high school, I started a relationship. Those high school relationships. This is why I will not let my kids start one. But it actually turned really toxic. So a few years out of high school, it was really toxic. It was really bad, and I wasn't allowed friends that weren't his friends. So I was quite isolated. It had a really messy ending, to cut a long story short, and one of his friends, one of our mutual friends that I was allowed to be friends with, was actually in my friendship group at school as well, and he would always be inviting me to church during high school. So I reached out to him and just said, I just felt compelled to go to church, honestly, and reached out to him, asked what church he went to, asked if I could come with him, asked what I needed to wear. Like, I just had no idea. And went to the church where ironically Andrew went. So I went to great little church, actually, Shiloh Church in Goodna. So
he was actually my best friend, so he was looking out for me.
Good work. That's what best mates are for, mate.
It is.
That's good. So how did you come to faith, Andrew?
Yeah, I grew up in church, so I think I can actually remember the distinct moment where I made a decision to be a Christian for myself, which was somewhere around 95. I can remember that. I can also remember, like, I'll give credit to my mum. My mum raised us, even though she was doing it in a lot of ways as a single parent in those formative years, but she always kept us in church. It's probably why a real value of ours is having strong men in the church too, because my mum did the journey herself and put 3 kids through private school. But also, in addition to that, there was a bunch of guys in church who really supported my mum and helped look after her. So she fought to keep us involved in church. She fought to keep us involved in youth ministry. She fought to create avenues for us. Even in the middle of her struggling, we never missed a youth camp. We never missed anything in that space because she always made a way for it. So I kind of stayed throughout church, and then made a decision myself that this is the life I was going to live from a really young age.
Very good. So you two met in the mighty Goodna, which, for those people that don't know Queensland, it's a little bit like Paris, but speaking in English, I guess.
Totally like Paris.
So you met one another there. So who fell for who first?
I think it was at the same time.
Yeah, we'll say that. Yeah. I was definitely, my flirting game was I thought it was strong, but in retrospect, it was probably pretty weak. But yeah, it was kind of happened at the same time.
All right, we'll take that one. Just going back to Crystal. Yeah. So you've obviously explained already tough childhood to tough adolescence, but there was even more. So even in adulthood, you ended up having gone through all the stuff you went through, even as a Christian, facing anxiety, facing depression. Just talk to us a little bit about that for a minute or so.
Yeah, so probably it started about 8 years ago. I'd say that I was never really happy. And there were some areas in my life that I really didn't let God have full reign on and allow me to, I wouldn't allow myself to believe some of his truths that he said about me. But I hit a really low point. So about 8 years ago, I started to see a counsellor. I was a school chaplain. So professional development was something that I had to do every quarter. So then I just needed to see that person a bit more often. I was in a really dark place. I actually started to take medication, and I'd stop because I wouldn't feel like myself, and I'd start again because I just, was in, honestly, the darkest place. Felt like an awful parent, felt like Andrew and the kids would be better without me. And so felt like I should not be on this earth, because I'd actually do them a favour by being out of the picture so that Andrew can remarry someone else and he can get a good mum, a good wife. It's a really, really low season.
That's a dark place, yeah. How did you come out of that?
I wish I could say that it was like there was a tick box. I tried everything: medication, counselling. Some really helpful people in the church just told me to read my Bible more and pray more, which I was like, the only thing that's bringing me hope right now is my Bible. I don't think I've read my Bible as much as I did in that season since. But actually before being part of Hillsong, would make the annual Hillsong conference trip. So we're driving down with some friends down to Hillsong conference. I was actually violently ill because I just started to take my medication again. And it makes you quite sick at first. And I was just saying to God, you know what, like if I'm going back in this low place, like that's it. Like you'll see me soon. I'd really had enough. And so we were actually, I don't even think we had floor seats, but somehow my friend got us front row seats in front of a TD Jake session. And I remember him talking about, seasons and something to do with a cup. And he said these profound words, what you need to get through your season, God's already put inside you. And I had tears streaming down my face from the start to the finish of that session. And I remember God inviting me to give all of my depression and my darkness and all of those wrong beliefs to him. And I have to be honest, it was actually a wrestle, because I'd become comfortable with that. If all of these things that I was believing about myself weren't true, then what was truth? I didn't know what that would be then. So that was actually quite hard. And I knew that God had said, and if I take this off you, like you actually have to share your story and be real, because who knows, you kind of pretend sometimes on Sunday mornings, especially in leadership, because you feel like you have to have your life all together and that people will judge you if you don't. So I gave it over to God, and just instantly I knew that I was healed, because it was the first time I felt like I could breathe. And that song Oceans, I resonated with so much, because it just felt like for once I could see clearly. I didn't have a negative thought in my head, because it was just constant and relentless. Anyone who's had depression or anxiety knows what I'm talking about. So I knew straight away that I'd been healed. And then there were other signs as well. It took Andrew a few days, because I told him straight away, and he's like, yeah, okay. And then after, he's like, oh my gosh, you are a completely different person.
There you go. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So God bless Hillsong Conference as well. That's cool.
Yeah.
We've not got too many minutes left, but just to change subjects completely, let's just talk church for a few minutes now. Where you sit today as campus pastors of a Hillsong church, and where we've been talking up to, there's obviously a massive journey that has taken place. Now, you are in Greater Springfield Lakes. The church that you were part of prior to Hillsong was known as Westlife Church. It's a church I had a lot to do with, because technically it was me that chose from Garden City Church to plant a church somewhere in Greater Brisbane area, somewhere in the region, and that was the area that I chose, and appointed leaders and started, and that was going on. That's a church that eventually you joined. And it was the old school kind of church plant thing, where you plant a church and 3 years later you've been the board, you've been the elders, you've been the financial support, but then it kind of becomes independent rather than dependent. New pastors come in, take over from the initial church pioneers, and at the end of their tenure, then the elders come back to us now as Hillsong Church, saying, we know Stephen Joyce, we love Pastor Brian and Bobby, could we become part of Hillsong Church world? And that is when we met the great Andrew and Crystal Midson. And so that was a transition from an existing church that asked to be part of the Hillsong world. And it wasn't a merger. It was literally the people and leadership joining Hillsong Church. How did that work out for you, as in a shorter way possible? What was the process? What was the thinking in that for you?
It's obviously a really big question. Any transition is complicated. I think if we were to talk about ourselves, we were lucky, because I felt like we postured ourselves at the start of the journey from Westlife to Hillsong to say, we are committed and we're in this, and we are prepared to relearn. I think that helped us a lot.
Definitely.
I think there's a handful of unique challenges in transitioning, particularly we were youth pastors at the time, and really had felt probably ready to finish in youth ministry for the last few years, but still had like a lot to learn about ministry. We'd also grown up in this church. Like, God really captivated something in our hearts for the whole Western Corridor, and that was kind of at Westlife at the time. So we'd been there from when we were married for probably 4 weeks. So there were people in that church who had seen us as 21-year-olds Like I remember when we found out we were pregnant with Ezekiel and Sabella, there was somebody who came up to us, because I was probably not as mature as the young man I am today. And they said, "You are not ready to have children yet. What are you going to do?" And I'm like,
We don't know.
Like, I don't know. I don't think I'm ready either. We'll figure it out. And you can pray for us. That'd be good. And so one of the unique challenges was you're transitioning a church and you're transitioning a culture, and you're also transitioning people's worldview on who you are and where your leadership limits are at and where they feel like your leadership is at. And all at the same time, you're going through what I could only describe as like a leadership and culture boot camp, where it feels like you're being stretched and pushed in every area personally. So you're sometimes changing and viewing the world at a pace that, number one, others aren't. But number two, you're changing and viewing the world at a pace that other people may not be able to cognitively recognize the change in you. And you're trying to lead a transition and trying to lead a new culture all at the same time. So that first 18 months was in a lot of ways challenging. And there was some, when you come from something, when you move from one culture into another culture, there were elements of the previous culture that weren't as healthy as areas that are really healthy within Hillsong. And that's a real challenge when you have to face some of your own beliefs that you realize about church, that this is not the way it needs to be done. And when you have to challenge that to yourself, that can be challenging. But there were also some people who struggled to identify what the new world of Hillsong would look like. And I remember in the early days, I just made so many mistakes in how I handled those. So it made that first 18 months kind of feel like it's complicated. It's probably the easiest way to say it. Yeah.
Okay. So both of you, Crystal and Andrew, just throw out some sort of words, trying to remember back to those first maybe 18 months. What did you see in Hillsong Church culture that you say that was different, or enjoyed that, or was challenged by that? What sort of words, what sort of areas?
I remember one of the first words we felt when we, it was around actually platform, but it was safe. It just felt safe, like you were safe to, your humanity was safe. You were safe to make mistakes. So that was definitely one word for me. Yeah.
I think it was safe. I think that there was a real sense of like a nurturing for our family that we hadn't necessarily firsthand experienced before. And like that was unique and different as well. I think the value and the partnership of excellence and the Spirit of God, the balance of watching that work out was really great. I'd say there's a whole big bucket that I would say that you put things in church growth, where there are things that we thought would be roadblocks or boundaries that you realize when you create health around church growth and healthy structure and healthy systems and healthy leadership. It's amazing what can be accomplished. And we probably had limited our thinking in some of that space as well. So we kind of learned a whole new blueprint on how to do church in that time too. But yeah,
that's excellent. Well, you guys have done really, really well. That transition from youth pastor coming into Hillsong Church, we made you service pastor straight away, which was in your mind just make Sunday work. But obviously in our mind straight away, you better learn quick because you need to be the campus pastors there. And you've done remarkably well. And everybody would say the same. But you two, your story is amazing. And that's putting those two things together of your background, personal stories, together with your growth in leadership, I think is absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of people naively think that pastors, leaders, church people don't go through the same as normal human beings, which is a ridiculously naive view of life. And I think you are walking proof that you've faced some of the more complicated aspects of just doing life. And here you are today, not just because you're pastors of a church, but that you've got your act together, you're mature, you can lead people, you've got a great couple of kids, you parent really well. Seriously, I think you've done absolutely fantastic. So well done. So Andrew, all those questions about maturity for having children, then maturity in leadership, whether you had it. So I'm just going to throw up a photograph right now of you that just demonstrates a little bit of a question mark of your maturity. Tell us the story about the skateboard. You got 30 seconds.
Well, I think every good father teaches his son how to, conquer life's challenges. And I said to him, I said, you should go down that ramp. And he said, that looks too steep. And I said, no, I'll show you how. And it's been a minute. And I remember falling off and hurting my ankle really badly. And then I didn't do anything. I just was like, man, it must be sprained. And a physio friend of ours saw a photo and he called me and he said, you have to go to a doctor, like get an x-ray right now. And the rest is history, as we say.
The rest is history, mate, and we will never forget.
2 screws later in my ankle.
We will never forget the photographs. That's fantastic. All right, serious question. What's it like to live in Ipswich?
Amazing. I've lived here my whole life. I love it.
And we live.
Why do people smile when somebody mentions the name Ipswich? For those that aren't from Queensland, what does that conjure up?
Jealous. They're jealous of the RSL. Okay. That's what they're jealous of. No, I think there's a stigma around Ipswich that I don't think is accurate, number one. Number two, I think the area we live in Greater Springfield, is a unique area in Queensland for a whole heap of reasons, and it is a beautiful part of the country to live in.
It is. It is. And I think one of the fastest growing areas of Australia, which is remarkable.
It is largest master plan city.
Just tell people in a few words about Greater Springfield, because the growth area, it's a master plan city, so it's beautifully done. Just give people a bit of a view without saying anything.
Yeah, it's unique because Greater Springfield sits on the corner point of 3 cities. So from our house, if you drive 3 minutes, you're in Logan. If you drive another 3 minutes, you're in Brisbane. So we're only just inside Ipswich, which is unique. It's also unique because of the master plan, which means that there's a whole lot of development that will come in here, including education districts, health districts, even into commercial districts. Yeah. It's actually the largest master plan city in Australia. Privately owned city in Australia. So there's hospitals going in. There's a university here already. And we're only just on the forefront. Probably the most accurate description of what we were in here. When George Agajanian was out one time, he said, this smells and looks like Borkham Hills. And I think we've got a really unique opportunity out here. And I think people don't necessarily understand that. They think Ipswich, 2 minutes down the road from us is a multi-million-dollar golf club where people live around. It's got a broad different ranges of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. The advantage for us is obviously there's a lot of that kind of people like us who live here, but there's also like a lot of need as well. So the opportunity for the church to be in full effect is actually really relevant out here. Okay,
so Hillsong Church, a few years from now, what's the vision? What do you see?
Yeah. Well, I know this. We've always been a pioneering location from 10 years ago. When you had this area in your heart, you were viewing it through the eyes of a church planner and a pioneer. So our heritage in this area is pioneering. At the last 5 years has been pioneering, from a church transition to a link to back into live services. The growth that God's brought the last 5 years has been remarkable. I think we're in for more of the same. Pastor Brian actually prophetically spoke over the region, and he used the word unprecedented growth. I think that you're going to continue to see something unprecedented out here. I genuinely believe that we're not here to make a small impact. I think that the kingdom of God is building through this region. I think there's so much opportunity in front of us. And if we take the lessons we've learned over the last 5 years, I think we're going to see continued growth. I'm believing and praying for a block of land and a building, but I don't need a piece of land to grow. I know that happens. I want a building to accommodate the growth that's happening. Yep. So the longer it takes for us to wait that, the more seats we can put in it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's remarkable what God's going to do out here.
It is. Well, that's great. So if anybody's wondering where to go live, then Greater Springfield is a fantastic place for your future, for you and your family. Listen, you guys are absolutely awesome. We're very, very, very proud of you for all that not only all you've done, but for who you are. You're a great testament to God's grace, God's goodness, and you're growing all the time. Your leadership's fantastic. We love your family and everything that's happening over there. So time's gone, but a massive thank you to you both. Appreciate your time and sharing your story, because it's a powerful one. God bless you. And to everybody else, God bless you all wherever you are, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.